when dependent on foreign markets. Well, a large focus of that, of course, is nuclear power. The government says the strategy will deliver the equivalent of one nuclear reactor a year instead of one a decade, as we've seen in the past. But how will this be achieved? And frankly, is it enough? Well, joining me now is Tom Greatrex, the CEO of the Nuclear Industry Association. Welcome to the programme, Tom. This is a bold strategy, but of course, we're not going to see any of this particularly soon. What do you make of what the government has set out this morning?
Well, I think, frankly, the government has got to a position where collectively as a country we should have got to 10 or 15 years ago, which is a recognition that if we are serious about not just decarbonising, but ensuring we have energy security, that the volatility of prices is much reduced in our energy mix, then we should be making sure we've got lots of low carbon capacity, of which nuclear is one element. And, you know, you're quite right that it won't deliver immediately in terms of the power capacity, but getting started on those projects now means that next time we're in this situation, we'll be in a lot better position. And frankly, if we'd done it 10 or 15 years ago, we wouldn't be needing to have this conversation today.
We're seeing a difference in the strategy between the large-scale sort of Hinkley Point C style reactors and plants versus what are called small modular reactors, which may well be able to get generating in pretty fast order compared to the longer timescales for larger stations. Are you enthusiastic about the prospect for small nuclear reactors?
Yes, I am. I'm very enthusiastic about what SMRs can add to the mix. I don't think it's a choice, frankly, between the two. I think we're going to need both in terms of what's readily available now. The next project will probably be Sizewell C, which is a design which has already been approved, and the equipment's qualified and the workforce is in place and supply chain's in place, and you can move on to that relatively quickly. But if what's promised in the strategy in terms of unblocking some of the barriers and making some really rapid progress on things like siting and a range of different things comes to pass, then we could have the first of those modular reactor designs. The Rolls-Royce is the UK consortium, but there are others as well. But we could have the first of those delivering power, you know, within 10 years. Now, that is pretty rapid for a technology which is currently in the stages of having its design approved. But it needs what's pointed to in that strategy, real action and focus and urgency on getting all the things that go around enabling those developments to happen unblocked and moving more quickly than we have done in the past. And that's very, very welcome, I think, because it's going to mean that we can get to an energy security position with most of our energy coming from low carbon sources much more quickly than would otherwise have been the case.
Of course, even one decade from now would miss that 2030 target for 95% of electricity to be low carbon or no carbon. I wonder what actually is the net effect of this, of course, because we are seeing a number of our nuclear power stations be decommissioned over the course of this decade. And really, the strategy says that we're going to get up to around a quarter of our energy coming from nuclear. That's not all too different from where we were a few years ago.
No, but there's a big difference in that electricity as a proportion of our energy will be much more significant than it has been. Currently, it's about 17, 18%. You know, much more of our energy, be that in transport, in industrial process, in heating, will either come directly from electricity or will come from energy sources that are derived from electricity or produced through electricity, like hydrogen through electrolysis, for example. So the amount of electricity capacity we're going to need is going to be much more. So if you look at it in terms of gigawatt capacity, it looks like a lot more, but it gives us to broadly the same proportion that we had 15 or so years ago when it was about 25% of our power coming from nuclear. At the moment, it's about 15%, and that's going down because, as you quite rightly say, our current fleet of power stations is getting close to the end of its generating life, and so they need to be replaced. But we need to do more than replace them if we're going to have that secure, reliable, low-carbon system we're talking about.
I'm concerned with this decommissioning schedule because is there going to be a gap before we can get these new nuclear power stations up and running? Will we see a decrease in capacity, in supply, in the meantime? Or is there enough to bridge that gap?
We're already seeing and have already seen in the course of the last few months, as the first of those power stations that have retired, a reduction in the low carbon capacity that we've got and the low carbon firm capacity that we've got, the bit that's not weather dependent. And we'll see that, I think, probably in our in our outlook in terms of the emissions that we'll have coming through the system in the next couple of years. We'll start to bridge some of that gap when Hinkley opens. That will replace some of it. But no, we need to move much more quickly. And I think that's what's very welcome about what's been announced today. And we look forward to the detail of it, in that it's addressing and acknowledging that real urgency and having to move at much quicker pace than we have done previously. And we need to do that to minimise the impact of that gap.
Well, Tom Greatrex, thank you so much for talking us through those issues. Clearly a very, very important strategy and a strand of that strategy this morning. Tom Greatrex from the Nuclear Industry Association, thanks for joining us.